Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on culture and identity, looking at middle class identities. The concept of a middle class identity is a difficult one to define, as many different sociologists often see the middle class as being the default identity within different social institutions. Middle class norms and values are present in the education system and reflected throughout the media. Family values are often a reflection of the interests of the middle class, and religion can be argued to do the same. As a result, identifying as middle class and having the cultural knowledge and habitus of the middle class puts those who identify as such at an advantage in many different fields. In this video, we're going to look at some of the sociological perspectives on middle class identity and how they are reflected throughout different social institutions. Despite the argument that middle class identity is a default identity, there is diversity within the middle classes, and there is no one singular identity that those in the middle class take on. Some are defined by their professions. Those in the media, education, medicine, law and accounting are often defined by their occupations and the interests of those with similar occupations. Leisure time is spent with like-minded people, and as Bourdieu suggests, this creates a cultural habitus of like-minded individuals whose cultural knowledge is rewarded. Others in the middle class can be defined by their creative roles within society, adopting politically liberal ideologies and having greater access to what is perceived to be high culture and entertainment. Further analysis of social class, particularly by Savage et al., suggests that new and middle class identities are emerging as people move upwards from working class positions. And finally, small business owners, often isolated yet classed within the middle classes based upon the power and status they have within their own businesses, can be identified as having specific values that align with the middle class, yet not necessarily sharing the same culture. As with other social classes, middle class identity often starts with the family unit, and younger members of the family are socialised into middle class tastes and attributes through their interactions with parents. For Bourdieu, being embedded in the cultural habitus of the middle class gives an individual advantages in society, as whilst a cultural habitus can be learned, being surrounded by it on a daily basis makes it a more natural way to demonstrate cultural knowledge that is seen as being of higher value. This can also be seen through attitudes displayed by the middle class family, instilling ideas of individualism, optimism, deferred gratification and future orientation onto their children. A further benefit of middle class identity is the confidence that is gained from the constant reassurance that their cultural knowledge is valued, as well as the material security to take risks, what Friedman calls the glass floor, an invisible barrier that allows middle class children to make mistakes, knowing that they will remain secure because of their parents' economic situation. However, not all sociologists view the middle class identity as the norm. Lawler argues that middle-class identities are often the result of trying to distance themselves from the vulgar nature of working-class identities. What Lawler calls the disgusted class represents itself through rejection of working-class ideas, norms, values and lifestyle, presenting themselves as superior to the working class. The advantages of having a middle-class background continue into education. Education socialises children into a habitus of middle-class tastes and attributes, and this reinforces notions of confidence as their culture is reflected as being important. Not only is this reflected in schools, but also throughout higher education, with expectations of obtaining a degree and even the ability to go into further postgraduate study often being reserved from those from middle-class backgrounds. Pupils are rewarded for displaying middle-class tastes and attitudes, and this is in stark contrast with the rejection of the working class habitus in education. As the media is largely constructed and maintained by those from the middle classes, it is perhaps not difficult to see how it reflects the tastes of the middle class. Lifestyle shows will reflect the tastes of the middle class, whilst programming, particularly on the BBC, reflects the tastes of the middle classes. As many editors, writers, journalists and producers come from a middle class background, they make programmes that reflect their own interests. News programming is often centred on the interests of the middle class, with focus on the performance of the economy and issues that reflect the values of different middle class groups. And finally, work. One of the main differences in defining social class is the type of work an individual does, and middle class identity is often shaped by these ideas. Not only does higher paid employment fund a middle class lifestyle, but it affords them connections with other middle class professionals. Memberships of associations such as the British Medical Association and the Law Society form part of an individual's middle class identity. There are also cultural norms in different professions, and these extend into leisure time. Golfing with business partners, dining with clients, and charitable events and organisations form part of the extension of professional work into leisure. Finally, many older institutions such as the legal system and local politics often reflect the norms, values and tastes of the private school systems, and this makes individuals with middle class identities feel at home, putting them at a further advantage. However, when looking at social class and identity, it's always useful to examine the extent to which definitions of social class are changing. In the Great British Class Survey, Savage et al. Found many similarities in educational level and economic capital between the emerging service class and the lower middle classes, who in turn often displayed signs of working class collectivism as opposed to middle class individualism. Furthermore, an individual's social class is one aspect of their identity. Their gender, age, sexuality and ethnicity can all impact on their personal identity just as much as their perceived social class. However, with stagnation in terms of social mobility over the past few decades, and even with sociologists such as Giddens arguing that class is less important in defining differences, it can be argued that the advantages gained from adopting a middle class identity are still reinforced throughout the different social institutions. That concludes this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on culture and identity, looking at middle class identities. Thanks for watching.